A meeting in Moscow in what may be the very first reaction to the Trump administration's overture to the government of Bibi Netanyahu. The president of Lebanon is pushing back. He is pushing back. All this while there is more fighting in Gaza between Palestinians and the IDF, making many wonder whether the U.S.'s pro-Israel policies may have once again made the Middle East a powder keg. We're going to begin our coverage tonight with Yulia Shapovalova. She is in Moscow.
Lebanese President Michel Aoun has arrived in Moscow for the first time. The recent events in the Middle East had a rather strong influence on the agenda of his talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's not surprising that the Golan Heights and their recognition by Donald Trump as Israeli territory became one of the central topics in the public part of the conversation between the leaders of the two countries. According to Aoun, this move by the U.S. president, quote, undermines all the foundations and rules of the UN.
Of course, this is very disturbing and creates particular concern for those countries that are in close proximity to Israel. We hope that a solution and a settlement of this problem will be found soon.
Moscow seems to have a similar position. The Russian authorities have reacted negatively to the recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which the UN says is occupied territory belonging to Syria. In addition, Moscow once again made it clear that, unlike Washington, it does not consider Hezbollah to be a terrorist organization, and that gives Russia an advantage in the dialogue on Syria with Beirut. Hezbollah is a Shiite organization and a key part of Lebanon's ruling coalition. It participates in the hostilities in Syria on the side of government forces. The organization is in hostile relations with Israel. Also, Hezbollah's presence in Syria was recently discussed by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo with the leadership of Lebanon. He visited the country just days earlier. The U.S. placed Hezbollah on the list of terrorist organizations. Moscow has economic interests in the region. In January, energy company Rosneft announced an agreement with the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources of Lebanon on the management of a terminal for the storage of petroleum products in the country's second-largest city, Tripoli. The document will be valid for 20 years. The Russian side will also carry out reconstruction and expansion of the terminal. According to the Lebanese Ministry of Energy, the total volume of the terminal's tank farm is 430,000 cubic meters. It can store gasoline, gas oil, kerosene and fuel oil. Yulia Shapovalova with the news with Rick Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Yulia. Meantime, tonight, the United Nations Security Council has been in special session, and they're talking about what the effect, well, they're talking about some of the things that we were just talking about, what the effect of the Trump administration's foreign policy will have on the world. For more on that, I want to bring in my colleague, John Huddy. John, let's do this. Let's start with Golan Heights.
Sure.
And what it is that the Security Council was actually dealing with today. What are they saying? What do they do?
Well, there was international condemnation, unsurprisingly, regarding President Trump's recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and specifically the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations, Bashar Jafari, who not only criticized Trump's announcement on Monday, but also accused the U.S. of basically perpetuating war in Syria. This is what he said.
This is a criminal project for which the U.S. government and its allies have exhausted all tools at their disposal. Moral and political tools have been used to guarantee chaos and destruction in our region, to divide us on the basis of religious and ethnic reasons, and to build a new reality as was imposed in the past.
As I listen to him, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just thinking, is that a lone voice at the UN or a consensus?
No, consensus. Yeah. So far, the Arab League, and I'm going to go through a list of other nations and groups, the Arab League, European Union, United Nations, Iran, unsurprisingly, Syria, of course, Turkey and Russia have all denounced President Trump's declaration on Monday, recognizing, again, Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and other nations also are jumping in on that. Of course, just the background here, as we've been reporting, as you've been talking about, President Trump did it during his meeting on Monday with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Just 2 weeks and here, this is the critical part, 2 weeks before the Israeli elections on April 9th. So many agree that this was certainly symbolic, that Trump is throwing his weight, throwing his support behind his buddy, Bibi Netanyahu.
But Netanyahu didn't need Trump to do this to win an election in Israel.
But it doesn't, I don't think it hurts him, because Trump is very popular in Israel. And right now, look, Netanyahu is facing investigation and indictments on corruption and bribery charges. So this is clearly intended.
Balance. Balance the negatives, as they say.
And the polls have been fairly close. Netanyahu still leads according to the latest numbers, over his competitor Benny Gantz, former IDF chief. So is this enough to, when people hit the polls on April 9th, to give him that boost? We'll see. But it's certainly, I don't think it hurts. He is popular. Trump is popular. And Bibi remains popular in Israel as well.
There are a lot of people, John, including our guest, Mike Maloof, who's going to join us here in a minute, and bring it into the conversation, who has a pretty good sense of what the reaction is in that part of the world. But before we go to Mike, I want you to give us, because you were based in Jerusalem. I mean, you're a journalist who has roots in that part of in that country, in that part of the world.
4 years.
You work for Fox News there. You've worked for others. So here's the perspective we would love to hear. What is the actual Israeli advantage? Why is it so important for them to have the Golan Heights? And if you could do it, if you could summarize, what's their best argument?
Well, first of all, there's the strategic significance of the Golan Heights. Militarily, in that region, it's a mountainous region, and those mountains provide really a natural buffer and border between Israel and Syria. So Israel has the high ground in that region. The other aspect is the Israeli settlements. There's more than 30 kibbutzim, moshavs, communities in that area. So there's more than 20, I think the last number, 26,000 Israelis live in the Golan Heights. Okay, so Israel isn't just going to give it back. There have been discussions in the past among Israeli leaders in Syria about land swaps, but that is strategically important for Israel.
So is it worth now let's bring in Mike Maloof. Mike Maloof, as you know, he's a frequent guest on our show. He's a former Pentagon official. Really knows this part of the world as well as anybody. Is it worth for the United States and Israel to do this Golan Heights deal, given what we know the backlash could be in that part of the world?
Was it necessary? Absolutely not. I mean, we had an international UN agreement that it would not be, it would only remain occupied. It would not be taken over. It would not be annexed. And they just went against all international norms. What's curious about this and interesting is that even the Saudis are very upset about this, and the Arab world is upset about this. And if Trump was going to be using those countries to advance his own Middle East policy, he's blowing it.
I thought the Saudis were in bed with Israel these days.
They were, but not on this issue.
So what could happen? Tell us the nightmare scenario, if there is one.
Well, we're going to be seeing potential demonstrations, greater demonstrations, and I think that there could be shots fired. And all the Israelis are looking for at this point are provocations. This is a provocation. Leading up to the elections, as John says, this is what Netanyahu is hoping for, so that he can just open up and then drag in the United States.
And at the same time, he's got kind of a small battle brewing, a frequent battle, we should say, with Hamas in Gaza as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of balls being juggled right now in that part of the world. We're out of time, but could you address that for just a second?
Yeah, and on Michael's point, a big concern among the Palestinians is that with Trump recognizing Israel's sovereignty and thus the annexation, that sets a precedent, or perhaps for Israel to annex, say, the West Bank. And that could inflame and stoke already high tension in the region.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. Finish up.
Yeah, it's also creating a larger geostrategic problem that this sets a precedent for countries that have been annexed, criticism that against Putin, for example, for annexing Crimea.
Exactly.
And we're going to be seeing
it can open some doors, couldn't it?
A lot of doors. A lot of doors.
Michael Maloof with the last word. We thank you, sir. We thank you as well, John.
My pleasure.
My appreciation. I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.